Let me know when we're live.
Buffering. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are live.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's 1:32 p.m. I'd like to welcome you to this special Committee of the Whole meeting for the Cowichan Valley Regional District for this Thursday, the 9th of June. As always, we'd like to start by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional ancestral territory of Coaxial First Nations. I'd like to welcome alternate Director Brian Harrison to the meeting today. He's in for Director Salmon. Beyond that, we basically have, I think, one item on the agenda today. Are there any minutes or anything, Ms. Harrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, not for a special meeting, but we would need approval of the agenda.
Which is the next item. Are there any late items from either staff or elected folks? Seeing none, the motion to approve the agenda as circulated. Moved, seconded, all in favor? And opposed, that carries. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next item is public input period. We have no applicants. And then the following item is reports. Report number R1, excuse me, is from the Economic Development Division, and there is a presentation by Mr. Mitch Taylor and Keith Ponton regarding Cowichan Connectivity Strategy Update, Vision and Priority Underserved Communities. There's a two-part recommendation. Did you want to hear the presentation first?
Yes, let's have the presentation first, and then we'll consider the recommendation when the time comes. Mr. Ponton, welcome to the meeting. And where did he go? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Taylor, also welcome to. Oh, there you are. You're down at the bottom of my screen. I'd lost you there for a minute.
Excuse me,
You folks have a you folks have a PowerPoint, I assume?
Mr. Chair, I believe that Brittany wanted to make an introduction.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Brittany.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brittany Taylor, Acting Manager of Economic Development Division. And yes, I will just introduce our consultants from IBI Group. As you've said, we have Mitch Taylor and Keith Ponton here today, and they'll be presenting first, and then I do also have a few slides to share, if I may. Thank you.
All right. So our general practice here is when there's a PowerPoint being presented, we don't interrupt. We hold our questions till the end. And generally, everybody who's not presenting turns their video off. That tends to preserve bandwidth, and we just get a better signal all the way around for everybody. So I'd invite folks to do that. And if you've got that PowerPoint ready to fire up, I'm happy to watch it. The floor is yours, gentlemen. Go ahead.
Yes, I do. Thank you. And we appreciate the opportunity to present to this board. Let me just adjust my screen so we can maximize the view that you're seeing. Okay, so we'll start today in terms of this presentation. The intent of this presentation is really to provide a project overview. We start by talking a bit in terms of education to provide some level setting on terms of reference and what we are talking about within the broadband domain. And we also will explore the role of local government. The third item on the agenda in terms of current state, at that point, I will hand the presentation over to Brittany, and she will take you through that material. So in order to provide some context around why even we're having this discussion with municipalities, it is really somewhat of a looking back in history. The private sector telecommunication companies have in fact been the sole investors in internet and cellular connectivity. They are driven, of course, by market forces and a desire to make a positive return for their shareholders. And as population density grows and spreads into rural areas, areas with low population density are unable to support the high cost of infrastructure, and therefore private investment is not occurring. And we're left with many rural areas that have insufficient broadband connectivity and no private sector business case or appetite to invest to correct the situation. So certainly our experiences through COVID-19 highlighted the many benefits of having proper connectivity. The internet has become a very vital fabric and utility through which many important both business and personal communication is occurring. Certainly at an individual level, we would recognize the ability to educate from home, receive healthcare consultations remotely, and as well as being a source of entertainment and connectivity to supply us with content in terms of programming, as well as a source of interaction through social media and other forms of entertainment. Certainly more and more from a government perspective, many governments are looking to deliver their services through online channels versus traditional in-person channels. So certainly all levels of government are moving their services online. And it's important for citizens to be connected, to be able to participate and receive government services. So certainly many benefits, which I'm sure everyone can list additional benefits beyond this slide, but just to highlight the most important and top of mind. So of course, to set the stage of what we're talking about here, we're talking about the ability to transmit high capacities of data across long distances at high speeds. There are various technologies that allow us to accomplish this, and while we'll give you an overview of these technologies, we are certainly not expecting you to we're not expecting to have a deep discussion on a technology basis. It's more about policy direction and what can the CVRD do to facilitate improved services for your residents and businesses. The final point on this slide, which is one we'll touch on in future slides, is that the best technology is that exists today for this type of transmission are fiber optic cables. Certainly they are the most future-proof and reliable. They also happen to be the most expensive, and certainly installation of these fiber optic cables through difficult and challenging terrain leads to limited investment due to the economics of individual projects. So the entire spectrum of technologies that are used to deliver broadband are presented on this slide. They each come with their own nuances. Certainly some technologies, those on the left-hand side of the slide, for example, DSL, traditional legacy technologies, limited speeds and throughputs. Most of us would recognize that the cellular network, the mobile data network, also provides us with internet access. It is, of course, optimized to be a mobile network, and while it does a good job of allowing us to receive limited quantities of data in a mobile setting, it is not optimized for fixed or residential or business use as a replacement for other landline technologies. Satellites have been delivering internet services for decades. Traditional fixed satellites, often used in the far north, offer very relatively low speeds and extremely high cost to deliver these services. Many are familiar now with the next generation of satellites called low Earth orbit satellites. There are many private companies investing in this technology. Starlink certainly is one that seems to get the most airtime, but Telesat Canada is also investing in low Earth orbit satellite technology. The technology, low Earth orbit technology, is certainly an improvement over legacy or historical satellite services, but it remains limited. It is relatively high cost in a total cost of ownership on a long lifespan basis, and it is susceptible to location and weather interference, as well as other things that impact satellite systems. Coaxial cable technologies traditionally were installed, primarily the original coaxial systems were installed on the basis of providing community or local television programming, and television signals were brought down off the air and transmitted to homes using coaxial cables as a more reliable technology than over the air. Cable companies have figured out how to use these same cables to deliver internet services. And while the cables are very effective at providing high download speeds, the technology does quite severely limit the ability to have high upload speeds. Fixed wireless technologies, this is often referred to as point-to-point wireless, so differentiating from cellular, which covers us as we move around. These are fixed wireless solutions, traditionally from a radio tower to a subscriber's home or business. These are solutions that are designed to provide some bandwidth. They can achieve comparable download and upload speeds, so what's called symmetrical service. They are often impacted in their usability by the distance between the 2 points that are transmitting and receiving the signal, as well as line of sight. So terrain blockage, as well as dense tree cover and foliage, as well as some weather conditions, will impact the ability of the signals to make their way. Fiber optic infrastructure, as I referenced earlier, it is, if you like, the gold standard. It has been deployed for many decades, easily 30 plus years in deployment. It is considered somewhat future-proof. The major cost of the system is installing the fiber optic cables once, and then the electronics that light up these cables are relatively inexpensive and can be upgraded typically in about 5-year cycles. As I mentioned, the infrastructure is long-lasting. The useful life of fiber optic infrastructure is at least 30 years. Some systems are going on to be 50 years old and performing very well. As I mentioned before, the main drawback of the technology is the initial cost of installation. Just a different chart to help us visualize the capacity comparisons between the various technologies. So articulating the ability of fiber optic infrastructure to perform well with both upload and download speeds. This is important for applications such as two-way video applications, an application that we're using right now, where both upload and download is important. And you'll see the various other technologies and how they perform from both an upload and a download perspective. Certainly, each individual will identify in terms of how often and how heavily they use broadband services. There are some residents and that are not online a lot and have very limited use for broadband. So those that just need to send emails and use occasional web searches. Those types of users of broadband are becoming fewer and fewer, certainly as more and more applications as well as government programs and deliveries go online. The need for increased speeds continues to grow. Smart devices are proliferating within the home environment, both from an entertainment perspective as well as various other functionalities such as security, energy management, and the like. There are many screens proliferating in many homes right now. Gone are the days of a single television that the entire family watches one program at once. There are often many programs being watched on an individual basis by members of the family, much content streaming in parallel. So it's very common, just as we discussed, to have a rationing mentality with bandwidth. There is insufficient bandwidth to the home in a lot of cases, and homes have figured out a mechanism to ration the bandwidth such that the most important uses as determined by the home are prioritized, and other users who may otherwise want to use broadband services are asked to wait until other times where there's less usage going on in the home. Switching gears for a second to speak a bit about health and safety impacts of and aspects of broadband. Certainly, there is some concern or public concern or perception raised that radio towers and 5G have some potential safety considerations. Radio signals have been used to transmit voice and long distance telecommunications traffic for decades. They are heavily regulated by the federal government, and there are specific safety codes and actual field inspection protocols in place to ensure that there is no danger to the public from wireless communication. It is a very regulated domain within the federal government, and there are practices in place to ensure that that radio systems are operated with safety in mind. Another aspect of broadband that connects us to a public safety discussion is how the public uses broadband systems in times of crisis and to communicate and coordinate during emergencies. So traditionally, singular emergencies rely on a traditional 911 telephone system to summon a first responder to respond to an incident. In cases of large-scale weather events or large-scale non-weather-related events, but other impacts that impact a number of people at the same time, fires, traffic conditions, windstorms, those sorts of things. Citizens often turn to social media to coordinate their activities, to communicate and check in, as well as to coordinate a community level response to a widespread disaster or emergency crisis situation. So broadband connections do play an important role in public safety and emergency response, not so much as a traditional 911 first responder system does, but they often play a vital role in directing the community in terms of where to go to receive shelter, where to evacuate to, and how to check in with each other and communicate that parties are safe and accounted for. From an environmental perspective, broadband and broadband systems have a relatively low impact and footprint on the environment. These systems are, especially in the case of fiber optic infrastructure, have a very long useful life. So the raw materials used to construct them are not reconsumed, and the physical effort to install in terms of earth disturbance or attaching to existing pole structures is quite minimal. This is a shallow utility that typically lives less than a meter below the ground, and the surface disturbance that is created by their initial installation is normally, there are no signs of it after at least one growth vegetation growth season. They use relatively low power. Many remote systems are now being powered using renewable energy such as solar, and their footprint is quite minimal, and the systems are long lasting and somewhat considered to be future proof. In terms of the business of broadband, as I alluded to earlier, historically relying on private sector investment is no longer a viable strategy. So municipalities that were hoping to take a hands-off approach and hoping that private sector organizations would solve the connectivity problem, the luxury of that thinking unfortunately has passed. There is normally quite an active role for all levels of government to take positive action to invest and fund broadband infrastructure that is required to serve the residents and businesses. So certainly at a federal level, over the past 2 years, we've seen very large amounts of money being allocated, typically to both private sector as well as community-based networks with public sector shareholders. And within British Columbia, while there's been one round of grant funding that has flowed through the province from the feds, we are anticipating another round of provincial funding that will be allocated towards broadband systems in underserved areas throughout the province of BC. So that actual grant funding mechanism and program will be rolling out over this summer, and with some fairly aggressive timelines that will take place to access provincial government money to improve broadband in local communities. It's as funding becomes creative, there are also what are referred to as P3 models, or public-private partnership, being the three Ps, where private investors are coming into the market. These investors are looking to put their private investment beside public sector money, and they have a different return on capital expectation in that model. They're quite patient investors. They are looking for utility grade returns over a long life asset. So typically high single digit returns over a 30-year time horizon if we're talking about fiber optic infrastructure. So there is money being activated and deployed to start to solve the problem, stimulated somewhat by public sector grants and funding allocations. It's important to note that many grant programs are looking for shovel-ready projects as part of the grant funding applications. They are not wanting to fund studying or feasibility studies or planning. They are looking to fund projects that can be activated and are at a stage to start construction and typically be delivered within a time frame of 2 to 3 years at most. So historically, there has been a spectrum, and you can read this this chart from left to right is increasing involvement by local governments. certainly at the far end of the spectrum would be a very passive approach to broadband. And as you move from left to right, more and more municipal governments are taking an active approach. They may not progress their activity all the way to the right-hand side of this spectrum, which would involve investing in a public network and owning and operating such a network. But they often are the stimulus in terms of creating partnerships, being the facilitator of public-private partnerships and taking a passive role in that arrangement. Some municipalities go further to look to own fiber optic infrastructure, sometimes only for their own operational needs, connectivity between operational sites, fire halls, work centers, other water treatment or processing areas. These are sites municipalities will own for a long time and require communications. And municipalities have recognized that by installing their own infrastructure and having very capable IT operations, that they can do two things. One is to save money in terms of stopping to pay the private carriers for such a service, as well as form an anchor investment on which the private sector may build upon to further expand networks and extend these networks into business parks, industrial areas, as well as residential areas where the private sector would see a positive business case. So finally, the role of municipal government is certainly one, again, that progresses in this slide from left to right. A few points that I'd like to bring forward from this discussion. Certainly, the public sector does have some existing leverage with existing telecommunications carriers. The public sector does spend usually fairly significant sums of money on their own connectivity requirements, and by being able to focus some of that spending and incentivize private sector telecommunications companies to continue to invest, it is a leverage point in many procurement discussions around being able to get the most bang for the buck, as they say, or being able to ask for certain investments from the private sector based on your commitment of spending money with them for your own operational needs. The second point being the one that I just raised prior, the municipal locations can act as anchor tenants to support a future community investment or public-private partnership. And finally, certainly it's a role of municipal government to be prepared, to be able to take advantage of federal and provincial grant funding application intakes, to be prepared to entertain discussions with operational partners, to make decisions that on capital contributions if that's appropriate. Finally, certainly we've understood directly from the BC government that letters of support from municipal stakeholders and municipalities themselves are key items in any grant funding application that they will review. So you do have the ability to decide to offer your support to private sector companies that may approach you to apply for grant funding on your behalf. And you also have a point to use that discussion or leverage, if you like, to ensure that the needs of your community and especially underserved portions of your community are going to benefit from the support that you're offering. Brittany, this is my last slide, and I think we can dovetail at this point into the current state presentation that I believe you're going to be presenting next.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. I will steal the screen from you if I may.
For sure.
Great.
Go ahead, Ms. Taylor, as soon as you get your your screen up? We can keep going. Look at that. Seamless. This is awesome. Go ahead.
I practiced in advance. Thank you. So I'd just like to provide a brief overview of our project, the timeline and deliverables, the work we've completed to date, and the staff report recommendations, of course. Come on, here we go. All right, so here is the timeline for our project. IBI came on board earlier this year and has completed the Regional Infrastructure and Service Availability Report, which outlines the current state of connectivity in Cowichan. An engagement plan was also developed and implemented. So we conducted a number of regional engagement activities, including a survey and open house event. These activities were designed to educate the public and stakeholders to validate our understanding of the current state of connectivity services in the region and to help us develop a vision for the future of connectivity in Cowichan. Next up, we'll be doing a gap assessment looking at the current state versus the future vision for connectivity. And all these components will feed into the regional connectivity strategy, which will identify actions that will bring us closer to our future vision and recommendations around the role of the CVRD in implementing those actions. And we aim to have the regional strategy completed in early August. We are also creating community connectivity plans. Now that we have a good understanding of the current state of connectivity in Cowichan, we've prioritized 4 underserved communities for further investigation. We're planning a community roadshow in September, where we'll engage with each community in person to determine their specific needs and aspirations, and then develop a roadmap to improve connectivity for each one. The community connectivity plans will include technical plans and business cases for investment. We've also formed an advisory group for this project, including representation from the province, First Nations, the health sector, education, small business, and others. And the group is helping to guide our work and ensure that everyone has a voice in the development of the strategy. So now I'll provide an overview of the results of our engagement activities. Our survey showed that the vast majority of people in Cowichan have access to the internet, and largely through fixed broadband services such as fiber, DSL, or cable. Over 50% of respondents are satisfied, mostly or fully satisfied, with the speed and reliability of their internet services. However, only 34% are satisfied with the cellular coverage in their home or business. So building on that theme, we found that a full 50% of respondents either do not have cell coverage or frequently experience drop calls. A similar percentage have a landline telephone, possibly due to that poor level of coverage. Also, 30% of respondents have found themselves in an emergency situation where they were unable to call for help due to lack of cell coverage. So while our project focuses mainly on internet connectivity, the survey results do point to issues around cell connectivity in the region, likely due to our challenging topography and its impact on line-of-sight technologies. We also received significant amount of feedback related to the affordability of internet services and the value for the price paid. So you can see the stats on the screen, which were pulled from the engagement report, and they speak to this trend. Anecdotally, we've heard stories of people who have access to high-speed internet, but do not subscribe to the service because they can't afford it, or they have to choose between internet services and cell services. So this issue creates a divide between those who can afford internet services and therefore have access to all that connectivity provides, including healthcare, education, and employment opportunities, and those who do not. So based on the results of our engagement activities, staff are proposing the following vision for the future of connectivity in the Cowichan region. The Cowichan Valley Regional District is a connected community with an appropriate and efficient mix of technologies deployed throughout the region that provides affordable access to connectivity services for all homes and businesses. Connectivity enhances the livability of our communities by enabling business, employment, healthcare, education, security, and social and family connections for residents of all backgrounds and income levels. This vision is essential for the next steps in our project as it provides us with a target for our gap analysis. The resulting regional connectivity strategy will outline recommended actions to get us from our current state to the future vision. And now I'll speak to the technical assessment of the current state of infrastructure and services. The Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commission, or the CRTC, has set minimum internet speed targets of 50 megabits per second download and 10 megabits per second upload to every home and business in Canada. To track progress towards this goal, internet service providers, or ISPs, are required to report the speed of services they provide along each segment of road throughout the country. So in their analysis, IBI matched the location of each premise in Cowichan with the internet speed reported along the corresponding road segment. And that showed that 96% of premises in Cowichan should have access to internet services that meet the minimum download speed of 50 megabits per second. Now, the quality of the data used in this analysis is discussed in the report, and anecdotally, I will say that the data provided to the federal government by the ISPs is generally thought to be overstated. So because of this, we also conducted a campaign asking Cowichan residents and businesses to complete internet speed tests. The speed test data helped us better understand the community's internet experiences in the real world. And as you've seen in the report, 23 out of 45 communities had speed test results that challenged the federal data. Now, speed tests have their own set of limitations, but these results still point to the need for further investigation into the level of service being achieved in some of our communities. However, overall, the Cowichan region appears to be well served in terms of internet services, which matches what we found in our survey results. The analysis also found that only 67% of road segments in Cowichan are served, which speaks to the rural and remote nature of much of our transportation network and the inherent challenges that poses in achieving coverage for the most remote parts of the region. I'll also note here that we are working on gathering additional data from internet and cellular service providers on their infrastructure in the region. Any data that we are able to collect will supplement this analysis in the regional connectivity strategy. And this is the same chart that you'll find in the report. I won't go through it in detail, but I just wanted to point out that it's a great summary of the findings for each of the 40 plus communities that we broke the region down into. The chart shows the number and percentage of served and underserved premises in each community. It also shows the number of speed test results and how many met or failed the 50 megabit per second target. The last section on the right shows whether the speed test results proved or challenged the federal data and to what degree of certainty. So federal data was deemed to be proven if greater than 60% of speed test results matched the nearest road segment classification, and confidence in the speed test data was assessed based on having more than 5 results for community and representing more than 2% of premises. And now I'll speak to how we chose the 4 communities for the development of the community connectivity plans. We used the following list of decision factors with data derived from our technical analysis and the results of our engagement activities. We considered the number and percentage of underserved premises in the community, the distance to backbone infrastructure, such as a connected coast landing site, speed test data from the community, satisfaction levels as reported in our survey, median household income for each area, eligibility for funding, and whether community leaders expressed interest in working with us to engage the community and develop the plans. So based on these factors, we ranked the communities and chose 4 of the top ranking ones that we feel are in greatest need and also that represent different connectivity challenges, which will allow us to create templates for addressing each type of situation. So our aim in creating templates is to be able to use the community connectivity plans, not just for the one community for which they were developed, but for other underserved communities throughout the region as well. And based on all of those factors, these are the 4 communities that we are proposing for the development of community connectivity plans. We don't think the list is too surprising. Thetis Island has the largest number of underserved premises of any community examined in this project, so we felt they really had to be included. We've also spoken with Penelakut Tribe, and they've expressed interest in being included in the Thetis analysis, which makes sense given their proximity. DT Dot First Nation obviously is very remote, and unlike most of our region, has a very clear lack of sustainable backbone infrastructure. So they'll be an interesting example to tackle. Cowichan Station has the 2nd highest number of underserved premises in the region. So again, we felt they should be included. We've also had some interest from incumbent internet service providers in developing proposals to serve this area, so we hope to explore those options. And finally, the Cowichan Lake area combines several of the communities from the report into one larger area, which has pockets of very underserved premises, especially along the North Shore. Now, we chose this area because it gives us the opportunity to explore a partnership model between a First Nation, a municipal government, and a regional district. So once we have an approved list of 4 communities, we will begin on an engagement plan for the community roadshow in September, as well as the in-depth technical analysis of each community. And I think that wraps up the presentations. Thanks so much for your time this afternoon, and we're happy to take any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director Nicholson, are you at home, or are you, because of your internet problems, at the community hub again?
I had to say I debated whether I would do it from home to make a point. No, I'm at the hub.
You're at the hub. There you go. See, that just illustrates the point about Cowichan Station and Glenora. So, questions? Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's all very interesting stuff. This my whole life has been spent in cables, all the way through from megabytes to coax to fiber optics to terabits per second. So this is all good stuff. One of the things I am a great believer in P3 models. I think they work well. I've seen these all over the world, all over Europe. And is this something that is being actively sought after, or is this something that you think you will be go alone? And I'm not sure whether that would be a question to which presenter on that one.
Ms. Taylor.
I can start. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Director Wilson. I think we will be looking at those options as part of this project, depending on the recommendations that come through for the regional strategy, but especially when it comes to the community connectivity plans as well. We will be looking at different funding options, and which will be the most ideal for each particular situation or project that we identify through the recommendations. So yes, we definitely will look at those options, as well as the upcoming government funding that should be announced through the summer. We'll be also engaging with internet service providers to see what projects they have in mind for that upcoming funding as well.
That's great. Yeah, thank you very much. A follow-up, please, Mr. Chair.
Sure, go ahead.
And as part of that, have you had a look at some of the other countries which have gone along this? For instance, there are other countries which have remote areas, such as Australia and New Zealand, which are very, very similar to Vancouver. Well, certainly New Zealand is. What they've done there in their communities?
Go ahead, Ms. Taylor.
Thank you, through the chair. I have taken a look at some other areas in Canada, and there are some interesting examples throughout the country. But I think probably Keith or Mitch could speak better to the international examples.
Certainly, I will. I can't let a question about New Zealand go by without engaging my colleague Mitch Taylor. So I'll ask him to respond on that front. We've certainly are quite familiar with some international models, both Australia, New Zealand, and in Europe. So I'll let him elaborate.
Mr. Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Being a Kiwi myself, I've got a little bit of background in that, and yes, it's very challenging in a geography like ours. However, we have got some benefit of some projects going on with respect to.
I hate to say this, but is anybody else having breakup problems here?
Yeah, we're having troubles. You've got connectivity issues, Mitch.
Well, I happen to know who to talk to fix that.
But what sometimes helps if you turn your video off, maybe your audio gets a bit stronger.
Okay, we'll try that.
All right, go ahead.
Does that sound a little better?
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Okay, good stuff. Yes, just restarting there, I have a bit of familiarity with respect to geographically dispersed markets and environments. Although we have got the ability, the fortune of connectivity through the likes of the Connected Coast program here, that's going to allow some connectivity through the region that would generally be much more difficult to achieve to get those drop-off points and be able to create that interconnect location or pub site that we can leverage off into some of those communities. And I think programs before us have started to anticipate those requirements that I think the region has got a lot of potential for, is certainly in the underserved areas that we have. So the real challenge does become the last mile, and the last mile is a somewhat problem in our region, because we've got certainly challenges from the perspective of the size of our communities, being a little bit geographically dispersed in the perspective of the community itself. So trying to understand what the best solution is for those communities is really what our strategy and our plan is about for the underserved communities that we choose in this process. That being said, coming back to your point about the likes of a triple P solution, or even the working with some of the incumbents to expand on what they are already looking to do, our opportunities for the community. Yes, I mean, the region is a large region, and when we talk about the west coast of the island, which is certainly one of the areas that we know is really challenged by connectivity. However, there's a real need for it as well. So I think they're ideal for the funding solutions, but applications need to be submitted, like Mr. Ponton mentioned earlier as well, to take advantage of some of this federal funding. Because even without federal funding, many of these projects are not viable from a capital perspective. So working with partners, whether it's the ISPs themselves or venture capital groups that are interested in this, I think is an important piece of the process of determining what the opportunities are for the community. That being said, we are always a very strong advocate for the community themselves to have an active role in the network, in order to leverage their own potential for cost savings, and also to expand their services to the community as well. So we certainly see it as a strong potential, and we have worked with other communities in support of having that relationship or that partnership between industry and the community to being the strongest solution, so that not only is the community well served with the connectivity that they need, but the local government has the services not only at a controlled cost perspective from an IT cost control perspective, but also the ability to leverage that technology to expand on the services that they get, whether it's healthcare or municipal services.
Yeah, that more than answered my question, I think. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Taylor. I must admit, I spent lots of time down in Kiwi in the mid-70s, a wonderful place. And one of the points you mentioned there is actually the last mile being the most difficult part. And this is something that we will have to address very, very carefully, I would think, because that's where most of the cost is going to come. Thank you very much for your answers.
Thank you, Director Wilson. I've got Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I suspect that my question is a little premature, but it would be nice to have just a sense. And as Director Nicholson's area director, I'd like to know when her area could expect to have better service. Or what kind of what kind of time frame do you think this could encourage?
Ms. Taylor.
That's a great question. Excuse me, through the chair. That's a fantastic question. I would say it depends how we approach it, or the recommended approach. If we're looking at government funding through if there's potential for partnership in the upcoming government funding, it could happen fairly quickly, within a few years, I would say. If not, then if we're looking at forming a P3 partnership, I would probably lean on Keith or Mitch for their experience on how long that typically takes to form the partnership, and then to get actual deployment as well.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Certainly these partnerships can be formed relatively quickly. I will suggest or leave the thought with you that most of these government, provincial and federal programs feel that they're allocating enough funding to, I'll say, solve the problem once and for all. There's certainly some speculation as if the funding amounts are enough, but their mindset is that this will be the last big push for funding for some time. So most of the projects and conditions on them in terms of time frame have an end date of somewhere around 2027 at the outside. So that's probably the longest date that we're seeing in terms of an implementation time frame. But the approach, unfortunately, these funding windows only open up for a short period of time, and you need to be prepared, organized, and ready to take action to quickly form partnerships and move forward with plans. So, in summary, the partnerships can form relatively quickly, and we would expect project durations of no more than 5 years, likely 3 years being the average.
Sorry. They got 2.5 years. I didn't know where the mute button was. Anything else, Director Acton? Thank you. Oh, all right, Director Smith.
Thank you. I'm really appreciated the presentation today. I'm very excited to see Thetis and Penelakut at the top of the list there. That's often the first topic of discussion over on Thetis for sure. I was just wondering, do we have an update on the Strathcona proposal and the funding? So would that be something that the funding would be coming out possibly this summer with the application that the board supported earlier?
Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. Yes, that application is still pending. We don't have a no, we don't have a yes yet. So we will be meeting with staff from Ministry of Citizen Services next week, and hoping to get an update at that time on the Thetis Island application. Right now, we're not aware that it's been approved or denied, so it is still pending at this time.
Dr. Smith, follow up.
So some of the relationships, the 3P relationships, will require funding from the community. So, and I believe that part of that last mile funding would be required by the Thetis Island community, and the same for Penelakut. And is there any thought of any of the estimates of those costs, or are we still waiting for that? Thank you.
Ms. Taylor?
Through the chair, yes, I believe there were estimates of those costs involved in the application that was made last year, and I'm happy to pull those up again and refresh. Since the application hasn't gone through yet, I don't believe any further work has been done to further refine that cost. And I know some other regions were successful in achieving funding for projects in partnership with City West and Strathcona Regional District from last year's funding intake, and they have provided, or they have gone through the process of that partnership agreement and organizing the funding and that whole process. So those will be good examples for us to look at as we move forward and find out the decision on that application. So those processes have occurred in other regions, so they will be able to use those as examples as we move forward, hopefully.
And just further to that, and I only know this because I visited with the mayor up there not long ago. Gold River went through a very interesting process to get cell coverage. They actually, the village wanted to spend money, and they took it to referendum, and folks turned it down. And then the next election did it again, and people said, "Yeah, we want internet." So they approved the expenditure, and that one was in part. It was a P3 deal with, I believe, TELUS. So that's something that Brittany's shaking her head, so you're obviously somewhat familiar with that one already. But I just found it really interesting talking to the mayor up there about how they, what they had to go through to get that one done. Any other hands? Oh, Director Smith, I'm sorry, I thought you were done. Go ahead.
Well, I was sort of done, but I'm never done. There's usually something rolling around in my thoughts. One of the things that I have discovered over the last year is that a lot of the cell service companies are providing low income and seniors a lower rate for their cell coverage. So that's a really good thing for us to put out within our communities, as I know it really helped a lot of people here. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great when you have coverage, but if you're living somewhere where you don't, even cheap is no good. Director Martman.
Thank you. And I appreciate this report. And I had a question, though, I think to Brittany. This is more around, I'm trying to understand when you use the word appears to have connectivity and appears to be served. Can you elaborate more? Because it leads me to think that there's maybe more data that might be available, or...
Ms. Taylor?
Through the chair, yes. The reason for the word appears, I'll say, is that the data used in the report is provided to Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada by the internet service providers, so it is self-reported by the ISPs. It tends to be somewhat overstated in some cases, or the framework for providing the data doesn't allow for nuance in how it's provided. So occasionally the data that we've used in the report may be overstated, saying that people do have 50/10 coverage when they may not, which is the reason why we did contact the community. We reached out to the community and requested the speed tests be done as well to ground truth that data a little bit, although there are some other issues with speed tests as well, depending on the age and reliability of the equipment being used, or how many people in the home are connected at the time, how many different processes are underway, smart devices and whatnot as well. So in terms of additional data that we might access, the main one that we're going after right now is data from the internet and cellular service providers on their infrastructure in the region. They're fairly cagey about it for the most part, but we are working with some of the main providers to get more information on where fiber lines may be, where towers may be, where points of presence may be, that sort of thing. And that should help give a little bit more depth to the amount of information that we have.
Go ahead, Director Martin.
Thanks. Because living up here in Yellow Point, a lot of farms, and we have fiber optic not that far away. We have, Shaw Cable, a variety of providers, but they get to the end of our driveway as an example, and they're not coming down our driveway. So our internet is solely through a telephone line. So even though it's available, it's not serving the community or not serving some of the farms that have long driveways. So I'm sure I'm not alone in this. I think there's many other farm areas, rural areas that have the same issue. So is there anything going to be available for situations like that, where you want to provide connectivity, but all you've got, it's not the last mile, it's the last driveway in some ways. So, yeah, thanks. Just a question on whether that would be something that might come forward.
Yes, through the chair, yes, we will take a look at those options, because you are certainly not the only one. I know I've lived in a similar situation in the Cowichan Station area, where I lived on a farm as well, and I think it cost the property owners many thousands of dollars to run the cable from the bottom of the driveway to the house. So they did end up doing it eventually, but yes, it was quite expensive and not achievable for everyone. So yes, we'll definitely look at options for those situations as well. Thank you.
All right. I'm not seeing any of the hands, so I'd go to the corporate officer to read the suggested motion that's on the agenda. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation before you is number 1, that it be recommended to the board that the proposed vision for the future of connectivity in Cowichan be approved. And number 2, that 4 proposed underserved communities, Thetis Island and Penelakut Island, Didadat First Nation, Cowichan Station, and Cowichan Lake area, be approved for the development of community connectivity plans.
And is that a motion, Director McGonigal? All right, seconded by Director Staples. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Oh, no, I think we're good. I'll call the question. All in favor? And opposed? That carries. Ms. Harrison, take us home here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have no applicants for question period, so a motion to adjourn.
That's moved and seconded. All in favor? And opposed? That carries. The meeting's adjourned at 2:30.